They sneered, calling her the token pilot, certain she was there for a photo op. But when the training flight skidded to an impossible halt, the senior instructor stepped onto the blistering runway, took off his cap, saluted her, and addressed her by a call sign the cadets had never heard, a name still buried in classified files. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit the subscribe button. The first time Rain Morgan stepped onto the tarmac at Falcon Crest Air Training Center, she walked like someone used to being underestimated. Her boots were standard issue, but already broken in. Her olive flight suit clung to an athletic silhouette that didn't match the paper-thin record in her personnel file. And her eyes, green, unreadable, with the slight downturn of someone who'd seen storms far beyond what the simulators could recreate, remained locked straight ahead. No nods, no posturing, she simply moved forward, quietly, unapologetically, and the whispers followed. They called her the token. That was the word passed along the benches, the hallways, and under the hum of hangar lights. Some said she was a PR stunt, others that she had friends in the Pentagon. No combat background, no academy pedigree, just a fast-track name dropped into Flight Group Charlie for optics, they noted. The softness of her voice during roll call, the way she didn't react to the comments trailing behind her after every morning briefing. When she asked questions, they were too precise. When she didn't, they said she was too passive. No one noticed how she ran with perfect form during PT or how she double-checked pressure gauges others ignored. No one saw her eyes linger on engine casings, as if reading the fatigue through the metal. She was just another file in a uniform, forgettable, until she wasn't. Her bunk was near the window in the far corner of the barracks, where the noise of the others doled into distance and the smell of jet fuel drifted in before sunrise. On the first night, while others pinned up flags, medals, or letters from home, Rain opened her small canvas duffel and took out only two things: a well-worn notebook with a black elastic band, and a cloth-wrapped object that she kept folded inside the inner lining of her locker. No one saw it. Not then. She said little, but she watched everything. The instructors weren't much better than the recruits. Captain Forrester, who ran preliminary simulator assessments, never looked her in the eyes during briefings. Lieutenant Briggs, her physical navigation evaluator, marked her maps with heavier pencil strokes than anyone else's, like he was daring her to make a mistake. They called her Morgan, in the clipped tone reserved for paper pilots, those who passed on theory and crashed in execution. Still, she kept to the margins, absorbing procedures, memorizing airframes by feel. While others laughed in the mess hall, she sat with her tray untouched, replaying every checklist in her head. But it was in the hangar, alone, in the shadow of the Texan II turboprops, that she came alive. She touched the rivets with silent reverence, not as someone admiring complexity, but as someone reacquainting herself with a language long suppressed. She moved around the aircraft slowly, precisely, as if retracing a path once stolen from her and now quietly reclaimed. Mechanics noticed, even if they didn't speak up. One of them, an older tech named Ortiz, watched her run her hand across the engine cowling of a trainer late one night and muttered under his breath, "She's not green, that one mows." But Ortiz didn't report what he saw. No one did, and the silence worked in her favor. The first real test came during a routine two-seat maneuvering exercise in low crosswind simulation. Standard flight with mild instability, enough to spook the untrained, but nothing dangerous. Rain's co-pilot that day was Cadet Puett, a loudmouth second-generation flyboy who had already dubbed her Walmart Top Gun behind her back. He joked on takeoff. She didn't respond. He called her Passenger Princess during climb. She adjusted trim without blinking. But when the wind shear increased and the craft tilted hard over a heat pocket, Puett's hand on the yoke trembled. Rain took control smoothly, corrected drift, and brought the bird back into line before the instructor in the tower had time to radio a correction. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just landed perfectly, silently. The tower recorded the maneuver. So did the instructor on ground comms. But no one mentioned it, not in the reports, not in the debrief. Instead, the next morning, she was pulled from her regular schedule and assigned a solo evaluation flight with the head instructor himself, Colonel Thorne, a man known for chewing through cadets and demoting those he thought lacked edge. A man who hadn't flown with a recruit solo in nearly 4 years. And when Rain entered Hangar Bay 6 at 05:10 a.m. the next morning, alone, helmet under her arm, her notebook zipped in her inner chest pocket, and those unreadable green eyes fixed on the fuel-soaked runway ahead, something in the air shifted. No one knew why she was there, not yet, but something was coming, and the name she carried, unspoken, buried, forgotten, was about to return to the air. The hangar was quiet at 5:10 a.m., its vaulted ceiling echoing only the occasional metallic ping of cooling engine parts and the soft hiss of the flight line's generators warming up under sodium lights. Outside, the sky was still bruised with dawn, desert pale and windless. Rain moved alone through the narrow corridor between the lockers and the access ramp, her flight suit zipped to the collar, helmet tucked under one arm, the other hand curled loosely around her notebook, though she already knew every page by heart. No one else had been summoned, no briefings, no checklist team, no other cadet scheduled for this time slot. Only her name on the clipboard outside the instructor's office, one word beside it, Thorne. Colonel Elias Thorne didn't wait inside. He stood by the aircraft, already arms crossed, aviators perched low on a face as expressionless as the cracked runway. He didn't speak when she approached, he didn't shake her hand, he just looked at her for a long moment, gaze pausing briefly on the older patch sewn on the inside seam of her flight suit, a ghost of a former unit tag long since removed, the thread still faintly visible under morning light. If he recognized it, he said nothing. The aircraft assigned was one of the base's older trainers, a T-6A Texan II. Faded paint, fuselage scored by years of hard landings, but still mean in the wind. He gestured to the cockpit without a word. She climbed in, strapped herself tight, checked controls with silent efficiency. He climbed in behind her, sealed the canopy, and connected his mic. His voice came through crisp, dry. No training wheels today, Morgan. You either fly. You don't. Rain didn't respond. She powered up, toggled systems, confirmed clearance, and taxied the bird down the southern runway with a steadiness that drew no comment. Once airborne, she climbed clean and level, hitting every marker, calling each checkpoint with clarity. She kept her voice neutral, her hands light, her instincts tuned to every vibration in the yoke. But Thorne wasn't testing her routine at 10,000 feet. Just as the horizon broke open into mountain shadow, he gave his first real order. Kill the left engine. Simulated flame out. She did instantly. No hesitation. No ask for confirmation. The aircraft dipped. She adjusted pitch, banked right, compensated for asymmetrical drag, and maintained controlled altitude. Thorne's voice again. You've got 5 minutes of simulated glide crosswind coming in from your 2. Show me something. She didn't speak. She pushed the aircraft into a gentle arc, used terrain elevation to manage descent without bleeding energy, watched the airspeed gauge dance just below stall, and align toward a phantom strip of dry lake bed that wasn't on any standard nav chart. When she leveled off at 2,500 feet, engine still dead, nose steady, descent stabilized, he finally broke radio silence again. You've flown gliders before. It wasn't a question. Still, she said nothing. He toggled the comms off for a second. When it returned, his tone was different. Lower. Slower. You're not supposed to be here, are you? Rain kept her eyes forward, adjusted altitude trim by 0.5 degree, and restarted the engine mid-glide with a maneuver so smooth the prop didn't even hiccup. The aircraft purred back to life like it had never left her command. He didn't speak again for the rest of the flight back. On the ground, she taxied in silence, parked, shut down systems, unstrapped. He exited first, circled the aircraft slowly, then stood facing the edge of the runway where the flight line met the open desert. She stepped down, helmet under her arm, sweat cooling against the back of her neck. No applause, no clipboard, no audience, just wind and sun and concrete. Then, without turning, he spoke one last time. "You're not a cadet." It wasn't accusation. It wasn't admiration. It was memory. And when he turned to face her fully, his gaze wasn't filled with surprise or doubt. It was recognition. Then he reached slowly for the cap on his head, removed it with deliberate precision, and stood there in the heat, eyes narrowed against the light, saluting a woman who on paper had no history worth saluting. She didn't return the gesture. She didn't need to, because in that moment, with the wind cutting sideways across the hangar shadows and the aircraft silent behind them, she knew exactly what had happened. The story they thought they had buried had surfaced again, without warning, without permission, and without asking anyone's approval. The salute stayed with her longer than she expected, not for what it meant in the moment, but for the quiet confirmation it carried. Not a ceremony, not protocol, something older, something buried. After Thorne lowered his hand, he didn't speak again. He walked back to the hangar alone, his cap tucked under his arm, the silence between them saying more than any commendation could. Rain remained by the aircraft until the sun cleared the hangar roof and cast her shadow long across the concrete, like a relic out of sync with the era around her. Back at the barracks, no one said a word. No one asked where she had gone. But something had shifted, not visible, not immediate, just the air, like the tension in a room right before the glass cracks. Pruitt stopped joking. Briggs avoided eye contact. Even the instructors spoke her name with a new weight. They didn't know what had changed. They only knew someone like Thorne didn't salute recruits. Not ever. 3 nights later, as the lights flickered out for lights out, and the silence of regulation crept across the base, Rain lay on her bunk, fully dressed, boots laced, arms folded behind her head. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Something wasn't right. She could feel it. At 200 hours, a courier arrived. No knock, no voice, just a folded message slipped under her door, typed on thin gray cardstock, unsigned, training reassignment, withdrawn. Report to Hangar 12, 0300. No uniform, no questions. She read it once, then again, then carefully folded it and slid it behind the old patch inside her flight suit. She didn't hesitate. She moved silently through the darkened corridor, stepped into the open air, and headed toward the abandoned edge of the airfield where Hangar 12 stood, half eclipsed in dust and legend. Hangar 12 hadn't been used in years. Rumors around the base called it the Echo Box, a space where things were stored that no one wanted to admit still existed. Old drones, decommissioned armor, black-budget prototypes with no serial numbers. She arrived at 3:02. The door was already cracked open. Inside, the air was cool, stale, heavy with the scent of hydraulic fluid and secrecy. Fluorescence buzzed faintly above a stripped-down aircraft, one she hadn't seen in a decade. It was a prototype interceptor, carbon-skinned, shaped like a dagger, no markings, no insignia, just the same faint shimmer across the canopy she remembered from one mission she'd sworn never happened. A man stood beside it. Not Thorne, someone older, white hair cropped close, leather jacket over desert fatigues. No name, no rank. He turned when she stepped inside. "I told them you wouldn't come back," he said calmly. "Not after what happened in Kandahar." She said nothing. He stepped closer, studying her face like an artifact. "You're still carrying the call sign, aren't you?" Again, no response, but her jaw tightened. He exhaled slowly, like someone about to unlock a vault sealed too long. "They thought they could erase it, thought by reassigning you to cadet level they'd kill what you were, but Thorne saw it. He always had. The file, we all did. He reached into a sealed case and pulled out a small black patch, matte, unadorned except for the shape embroidered in ghost stitch thread, a falcon folded around a single line of code. She stared at it, then spoke for the first time since entering the hangar. That program was terminated. His eyes didn't blink, not entirely. Then he added, "We have a problem, and it needs someone who doesn't officially exist." She stepped forward, took the patch, didn't look at it again. She didn't need to because she knew the call sign they had buried. She knew the mission that went dark. She knew exactly why Thorne had saluted her, not because she had passed some test, but because he was one of the few who had seen the classified footage from that night over the Hindu Kush, the night her aircraft came back burned. Black box erased, and 2 operatives survived because she did something no cadet was supposed to know how to do. They called her the token pilot because they'd never been told her real title, but some still remembered, and now she was being reactivated, not as a student, but as a name whispered only in redacted reports, never spoken aloud. At 0600, the tarmac began to stir. Recruits lined up for drills, instructors reviewed flight manifests, and the sun broke through the hangars in fractured rays, bouncing off steel and glass with clinical precision. Everything followed routine, except for the presence of a single aircraft sitting apart from the fleet, low-slung, black-skinned, nose pointed directly toward the active runway. No markings, no number, just a shimmer along the fuselage that seemed to bend the air around it. By 6:30, the whispers had begun. A test bird, a classified asset. No one was told, no announcement came, but eyes drifted toward the tower more than usual, and when the PA crackled to life with a single line, "Clear airspace, Hangar 12, launch inbound," the recruits turned all at once. She appeared without warning, no escort, no instructor beside her, just a figure walking alone across the tarmac in a matte black flight suit, helmet under one arm, dark ponytail caught in the morning wind, eyes forward. Those who had mocked her 3 weeks prior, the ones who once called her the token, fell silent as she passed. She didn't acknowledge them, didn't break pace. Every step was precise, deliberate, without hesitation. Captain Forrester stood near the tower, clipboard in hand. His mouth opened slightly as she approached the aircraft. He made a move to step forward, say something, perhaps. She didn't stop, didn't glance, just climbed the ladder, entered the cockpit, and sealed the canopy. Inside the tower, Thorne was already watching. He didn't speak. He simply removed his cap again and held it under his arm, his eyes never leaving the craft. The engines powered up with a sound none of them had heard before. Not a roar, but a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the soles of their boots. The aircraft lifted, forward wheels rolling smooth, and within seconds it cleared the line. The runway was hers alone. No countdown, no ceremony. She pushed throttle. The plane responded like it had been waiting for her, and when it lifted, when it cut through the sky with a silent climb so clean it left no turbulence in its wake, the recruits didn't cheer, they didn't speak. They simply watched. Because in that moment they understood, this wasn't a test flight, this wasn't training, this was a return, not of a pilot, but of a legacy. They hadn't seen her before because they'd been looking through the wrong lens. The truth had never been written in her files. It had been etched into the air above classified zones, buried in after-action reports no one was allowed to read, whispered in call signs never spoken aloud. And now the air itself seemed to carry her name again. She didn't look back, didn't need to, because what needed to be said had already been heard, in silence, in altitude, and in the quiet, stunned salute of a man who remembered who she truly was. The roar of the prototype's engines had dissolved into the upper air long before anyone on the ramp remembered how to breathe, yet the vacuum it left behind clung to every open surface like static, tugging at sleeves, whispering into helmet visors, lingering even in the tremor of a clipboard still clutched by a lieutenant who suddenly realized nothing printed on his pages mattered anymore. No siren sounded, no klaxon blared, and yet an invisible perimeter snapped shut around the moment. A new no-fly zone of silence drawn not by command, but by collective awe, as though the atmosphere itself had taken a solemn vow never to forget the exact pressure, temperature, and taste of the air where she had last been visible. Somewhere high above, beyond radar arcs, and beyond the reach of any tower operator bold enough to track a craft with no transponder, Rain Morgan rode a corridor of stratospheric calm, the altimeter ticking upward in a slow, patient cadence, while desert morning spread its pale light beneath her wings like a map someone else would have to read. In the cockpit, she felt the machine answered the subtlest flex of her fingers, its carbon skin quivering with an eagerness that bordered on hunger, as if the aircraft too had been mothballed and forgotten, and now was tasting freedom it had only once been promised. Together, pilot and plane traced a rising spiral that parted the thin blue veil in search of a horizon wide enough to store a memory so long denied room to breathe. Back on the ground, the trainees shuffled out of formation, not because they were dismissed, but because standing in line suddenly seemed dishonest, a childish pantomime of order in a reality that had just revealed deeper script pages they had never been given to study. Cadet Puett sagged against the warm metal of a fuel truck, eyes locked on the empty sky. He could not stop replaying each mental playback slower and clearer, his earlier mocking words now echoing like gravel in his throat. He did not speak because apology felt inadequate, and he did not move because he feared any motion might erase what little he still grasped of what had occurred. Captain Forrester set his clipboard on the tarmac and left it there, paper fluttering in the hot wind like birds robbed of feathers. He walked to the hangar with the stiff stride of a man hauling a secret too heavy for his spine. A secret he did not know, but that he now suspected had always been stored between the rivets and seams of the base itself. Colonel Thorne remained on the control tower balcony far longer than regulation required, unmoving except for the tightening of his jaw each time a subordinate's voice cracked over the headset, asking for confirmation that the airspace was clear. He answered with one-word acknowledgments that sounded routine to inexperienced ears, but carried for veterans the unmistakable cadence of absolution. News of the unscheduled launch rippled outward in asymmetrical waves, pooling first in ready rooms where instructors stared at blank schedule boards, noticing a gap that had never been there, then seeping into maintenance logs whose digital signatures now contained strings of alphanumeric nonsense no one dared override, and finally leaking into secure internet channels where algorithmic filters flagged an impossible entry. Aircraft identifier, Z, Shadow 1, status, active, mission code, Phoenix Lantern, pilot designation, Bastocto, redacted. Some junior data officer tried to correct the anomaly, but found his access revoked mid-keystroke. The system that had invited him in now expelled him, gently but firmly, like a living organism isolating a fever, leaving him to wonder whether the fault lay in his credentials or in reality itself. Across the base, maintenance crews felt their work order queue reorder itself. Hangar doors, they believed welded shut, slid open of their own accord to reveal rows of equipment draped in blackout sheeting and hardened bunkers they had passed for years without question, now unlocked with a muted hiss as if inhaling the first breath after a long burial. While the physical base reconfigured, an invisible base, constructed of rumor, half-remembered briefings, and scraps of wartime myth, rose like a mirage in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the salute. An older falcon crest, Tucked inside the present one, a shadow installation built from oaths, classified beyond top secret, staffed by names erased from rosters but not from memory. Mechanics who had laughed at her curiosity now recalled older colleagues mentioning a Blackwing project, tested here in the final months of a forgotten conflict. Medical officers who had dismissed her scars as cosmetic now reconsidered every classified medevac log they had skimmed over the years. Chaplain, who had nodded to her in passing, now flipped through annotated pocket Bibles, searching for the sermon they had once delivered at a funeral that lacked a casket, trying to recall if the initials etched on the dog tag handed to them that day might match the ghost who had flown away this morning. In the subtle adjustments of their postures, the quieter register of their voices, the slower blinking of eyes suddenly called to see more than color and shape, the base absorbed the weight of a revelation no official memo would ever articulate, that the sky above them was not a training ceiling, but a repository of debts the present owed to the past. Hours passed. Heat shimmered above the runway. Exhaust fans roared in maintenance bays. Paperwork piled up as officers rewrote flight schedules now rendered obsolete. Yet no word arrived. Aircraft tracking screens remained blank. Radios crackled only with routine traffic. For those who would not witness the launch, the day unfolded normally. Sorties cycled, fuel orders processed, but for the inner ring of the initiated, every tick of the clock felt like a countdown, though to what they could not name. Some expected a call from higher command, some a sudden scramble order, a few feared an emergency beacon. All they received was silence, and the longer it stretched, the more they realized the mission might be one of those operations whose end point was never announced, only inferred when classified funding lines vanished and a box on a spreadsheet changed from ongoing to archived. Thorne knew this pattern too well. He finally left the tower, descended the metal steps with a stiffness betraying an old injury worsened by hours of immobility, and walked to a storage room under the operations building, where decommissioned flags and plaques gathered dust. He opened a drawer, retrieved a small velvet pouch, and slipped it into his breast pocket without looking inside. Then he locked the drawer again and destroyed the key in a handheld grinder, scattering sparks like tiny meteors across concrete. An observer might have asked what was in the pouch, but Thorne would not have answered, because the object was not meant for the curious, it was meant for whoever might one day return. rewrote the manual, and vanished with a call sign no one dared repeat. Administrators dismissed the tale as folklore, but at night, some cadets wandered to the far edge of the ramp and traced initials into the dust until wind erased them by morning, practicing a ritual of believing in legends too fragile to survive daylight. Officially, no after-action report surfaced. The sortie was logged as a maintenance test flight with routine outcomes. No media leak occurred, no congressional inquiry. Yet across certain encrypted channels, snippets of telemetry data circulated. Altitude climbs that exceeded airframe limits. G-force curves suggesting maneuvers unrecorded by any aerobatic catalog. And a faint ping of a signature return code that matched a Blackwing project terminated during a conflict most historians had filed under asymmetric engagements. Analysts debated authenticity, but those with eyes to see recognized the fingerprint, the improbable trajectory of a pilot who treated the sky like an equation only she had memorized. For Thorne, the future settled into restless calm. He resumed schedules, signed orders, taught new cadets, but every dawn he glanced at Hangar 12, half expecting the doors to stand ajar. Some nights, alone in his office, he opened a locked drawer, holding only the pouch, now empty, and stared at the velvet interior as if it were a window into a higher altitude. He never spoke of the day's events in staff meetings, yet any time an instructor voiced doubts about a trainee, he would pause, rub his jaw, and say, "Everyone carries more story than you can see." It was not policy, it was confession. Elsewhere, in airspace that rarely registered on civilian trackers, a dark silhouette sometimes crossed the moon at impossible angles, too swift for satellites, too shallow for meteors, vanishing before sensors could paint a full return. Some called it a ghost aircraft. Others, of keener memory, murmured a different word, one quickly silenced by protocol. Those glimpses never made news feeds, but in specialized forums used by veteran spotters, blurry stills appeared. A Delta wing craft without tail numbers, exhaust glowing white-hot yet leaving no contrail, crossing star fields like a silent scalpel. Tags on those posts read, Number Shadow 1, Number Ekalum, Number Wraith, still flies. In time, recruits who had seen her became instructors. They recounted the day in whispers to students too young to remember desert wars, but hungry for meaning. Each retelling trimmed details, distorted sequence, but one element never changed, the moment the instructor removed his cap. In that gesture, cadets found a compass more reliable than any heading indicator, a proof that respect born of fear fades. Respect born of rank rusts, but respect born of recognition, of seeing a truth no bureaucracy can stamp out, endures like anodized steel. Some day-room philosopher etched a phrase into the latrine mirror. Legends never retire, they just change altitude. The brass had it buffed away monthly. It reappeared monthly. Same handwriting, same depth of gouge, as though the mirror itself insisted on memory. As seasons turned, Falcon Crest remained outwardly unchanged. Jets roared, cadets graduated, budgets waxed and waned. Yet beneath the routines, a subtle doctrine spread. Silence is not emptiness. Quiet is not weakness. Anonymity can be armor. When media teams visited for recruitment footage, they staged shots of crisp uniforms and clean takeoffs, but the lenses always drifted, drawn by some gravitational myth to the far end of the ramp, where a single patch of scorched asphalt hinted an origin no official tour mentioned. Guides diverted attention with smiles, yet more than one cameraman zoomed blindly into that vacant spot, as if expecting the air itself to refract into shape. They captured nothing, but sometimes, that night, reviewing B-roll, they swore a shimmer teased a silhouette just for one frame. And though editors cut it, the shimmer haunted. In a quiet room deep inside the Pentagon, a clerk updating archival inventories found an old dossier reflagged from inactive to active. The file contained a blank sheet stamped classified across an image slot that had never held a photograph. He logged the anomaly, ran a security scan, received clearance codes exceeding his pay grade, and filed the report upward. It vanished from his queue an hour later. He told no one, but he began leaving his office window cracked at night, gazing toward the oblique slice of sky between federal blocks, wondering whether some truths were meant only for those willing to tilt their heads at improbable angles. As for Rain, no base ever officially received her transfer. No payroll processed her stipend. No medical bay stalked her blood type. Yet somewhere above contested terrain, where transponders die and satellites hesitate, flights were saved by a guiding vector that appeared on local radar as a fleeting line of code, then vanished. Convoy pilots reported hearing a calm female voice on an unused guard frequency, offering headings that threaded them between storms and SAM envelopes before going silent. One medevac crew, injured over the Carpathians, swore a black jet with no lights escorted them to friendly airspace, peeling off after a single word crackled through their static: home. Investigators dismissed the account citing shock, but the crew chief kept a charred carbon shard pried from his windshield, certain it matched the airframe he could not prove existed. Years later, when Colonel Thorne retired, the ceremony was small. He declined the typical slideshow, asked only that the tower window stay open during closing remarks. As the base commander thanked him for decades of service, a low hum skimmed the distant sky. Those on stage hesitated. Crowd members turned. High overhead, barely discernible against bright noon sun, a sleek black form traced a single loop, sunlight flashing across its dorsal edge before it slipped vertical and slipped from sight. No radar logged the contact, no alarm sounded, yet Thorne, standing at attention one last time, raised his hand, not to his brow, not formal, but outward, palm open to the sky. A gesture half salute, half farewell, acknowledging an absence that would never again be emptiness. Somewhere beyond classified borders, Rain leveled her craft, checked gauges, and allowed herself a single breath of something warmer than cockpit air. She felt the old wingpin press lightly against her chest. She closed her eyes for half a second, not enough to drift, just enough to let silence speak, to let memory stitch itself closed. Then she pushed the throttle. The horizon widened, and the remainder of the world, unaware of debts it owed, continued spinning beneath her shadow. Some legends never earn headlines or decorations. They glide in undisclosed corridors of sky, slip through the seams of paperwork, and carry whole histories in a single, silent salute. When you meet someone dismissed as a quote, a token slot, or a background extra, remember the quietest person in the room may have saved more lives than the loudest ever will. If this story found you, share it, not for likes, but to remind the world that humility can hide greatness, that respect can begin with listening, and that courage sometimes whispers from altitudes the rest of us will never reach. Tell us in the comments whose silence in your life might be holding untold stories aloft. And if you believe voices like Rain's deserve to be heard, join us, because legends may choose anonymity, but their stories need witnesses.